Stop acting like we are married. You do not get a say in where I go or who I am with. The entire dining room erupted in laughter. I just smiled and stayed quiet. But when he came back from his supposed guy's weekend, his key did not work, and the neighbor watering her petunias told him exactly why. My name is Claire. I am 33 years old, and I run a boutique property management and real estate flipping company. Last Thanksgiving, my boyfriend Derek and his toxic mother mistook my silence for submission. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to someone who drastically underestimated your worth. The air in my dining room was thick with the rich scent of roasted turkey and an unmistakable undercurrent of tension. It was Thanksgiving evening, and I was hosting 12 people in my 4-bedroom modern farmhouse in Westchester. Derek sat at the head of the custom oak table holding court as if he owned the place. He was 35, a tech sales director, with a sharp jawline and an ego that consumed all the oxygen in the room. His mother Patricia sat to his right, hanging on to his every word. Patricia was the ultimate boy mom, a woman who treated her son like a gift to humanity and treated me like hired help. I had spent 3 days preparing this meal, orchestrating everything from the artisan table settings to the homemade cranberry sauce. Derek had contributed nothing but his loud voice and a few bottles of wine he grabbed on his way home from work. As the dinner wound down and guests began pouring their third glasses of wine, Derek loudly announced he needed to pack for his early flight. He had been planning a trip to Miami with his college buddies for weeks. I reached out and gently touched his arm. I just asked a simple question about what time his flight left so I could arrange to drop him off at the airport. Derek recoiled. He pulled his arm away so sharply that his bourbon splashed over the rim of his crystal glass and stained the pristine white tablecloth. He glared at me, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. "Stop acting like we are married, Claire." He snapped, his voice booming across the quiet room. "You do not get a say in where I go or who I am with." The table went dead silent for a fraction of a second. Then Patricia let out a loud, obnoxious cackle. Soon Derek's friends joined in, chuckling and shaking their heads at my expense. I sat frozen in my chair, my hands still hovering in the air where his arm had been just a moment before. The humiliation burned my cheeks, but I refused to look away. Patricia leaned across the table, waving her manicured hand dismissively in my direction. "Let him breathe, Claire," she said, her voice dripping with absolute condescension. "He pays the mortgage on this massive house every single month. The least you can do is let the man relax and enjoy his hard-earned money. Your little house decorating hobby is not exactly bringing home the bacon, is it? You should be grateful he provides such a beautiful roof over your head." I slowly lowered my hand to my lap. My little house decorating hobby. That was what she called my private real estate investment company. Derek had apparently let his mother believe he was the sole provider, the master of the house, while I was just his dependent girlfriend, playing with paint swatches. I looked at Derek. He smirked, taking a long sip of his drink, basking in his mother's praise. He did not correct her. He let her humiliate me in front of our friends and family. My eyes dropped to his wrist. The gold Rolex glinted in the warm light of the chandelier. I had paid the credit card bill for that exact watch 3 weeks ago because his entire tech salary was completely tied up in his sports car lease and his expensive bar tabs. He was a fraud, and Patricia was his biggest enabler. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of sage and butter fill my lungs, forcing myself to maintain my composure. The sheer audacity of his lie was staggering, but reacting emotionally was exactly what they wanted. I knew that showing any sign of weakness would only fuel Patricia's cruel satisfaction. I chose to bide my time, knowing that the ultimate victory would belong to the one who held the actual deeds and the financial records. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or try to explain the truth to Patricia. Arguing with a narcissist is a losing game, and I had a much better strategy in mind. Instead, I picked up my wine glass. I looked Derek dead in the eye, offering him a serene, ice-cold smile. "You are absolutely right, Derek," I said evenly. "You are completely free." The rest of the evening was a masterclass in performance. I cleared the plates, served the pumpkin pie, and listened to Patricia brag relentlessly about Derek's recent promotion. Derek played the generous host, offering my expensive reserve wine to his friends as if he had bought it himself. I watched it all with detached amusement. Let them eat, drink, and be merry. It would be their last meal in my home. The next morning arrived with a flurry of chaotic activity. Derek was packing his designer duffel bag for his supposed guy's weekend. He was agitated, barking orders at me to find his favorite silk shirts and his expensive sunglasses. I complied silently, fetching his things and folding them with precise care. The Uber arrived honking loudly from the driveway. Derek grabbed his bag and threw his jacket over his shoulder. He barely looked at me as he headed for the door. "Do not wait up," he said, not bothering to turn around. "I might be unreachable this weekend. Cell service is terrible where we are going, and I just want to unplug." I stood on the front porch, wrapping my cardigan tighter against the crisp autumn chill. "Have a great trip, Derek." I watched the black sedan pull out of the driveway and disappear around the corner. The moment the taillights vanished from sight, my serene smile dropped. My face hardened into stone. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened a text thread. My fingers flew across the screen, typing a message to my brother-in-law, Terrence. "Terrence, initiate Plan B. The parasite has left the building. It has..." I walked back inside my quiet house and locked the front door. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I walked straight to my home office and opened my laptop. Less than 20 minutes later, a silver SUV pulled into my driveway. My younger sister Allison and her husband Terrence stepped out carrying thick leather briefcases. Terrence is a brilliant African-American forensic accountant with a mind like a steel trap. He is 36 years old, impeccably dressed, and possesses a calm clinical demeanor that makes him terrifyingly effective at his job. He and Allison had been waiting for my signal all morning. They walked into the kitchen, their faces serious and focused. Terrence set his briefcase on the granite island and pulled out his computer. He did not waste time with small talk. He immediately began bypassing the standard passwords on the joint financial portals Derek and I shared for household expenses. Terrence spoke in sharp, precise accounting terms as his fingers flew across the keyboard. He was not just looking for a simple vacation booking. He was tracking a long history of commingled funds and hidden transactions that Derek thought I would never find. I poured coffee for Allison while we waited in tense silence. My sister paced the length of the kitchen, her fists clenched at her sides. "I cannot believe he actually said that to you in front of everyone," Allison muttered, her voice shaking with anger. "And letting that horrible mother of his insult your business. She called it a decorating hobby. Does that arrogant jerk not know this house is worth over $1 million and is owned entirely by your corporate entity?" I handed her a warm mug and smiled coldly. "Derek never bothers to read the fine print," I explained calmly. "He thinks the money he transfers every month is paying a mortgage." He did not read the documents I handed him 18 months ago when he moved in. He signed a standard residential lease agreement. He has zero equity in this property. He is literally just my tenant, and he thinks he is the king of the castle. Terrence cleared his throat, drawing our attention back to his bright screen. He hit the enter key one final time and spun the laptop around so I could see the display. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Miami is not a guy's trip, Claire," he said quietly. He used the household renovation fund to book a luxury oceanfront suite at a 5-star resort. And the second guest registered on the reservation is not one of his college buddies. It is Skylar. Skylar was a 26-year-old junior sales representative at Derek's technology firm. She had attended our holiday party last year, laughing too loudly at his jokes, and constantly finding excuses to touch his shoulder when she thought I was not looking. I had suspected something was wrong for months, but seeing her name printed clearly on the hotel confirmation made the betrayal absolutely undeniable. Allison gasped in pure outrage. She slammed her coffee mug down on the counter, looking ready to smash every piece of glass in the kitchen. "That absolute scumbag," she yelled. "He is taking his coworker on a romantic getaway using your money. I am going to drive to the airport and drag him off that plane right now." I held up a hand to stop her. I did not yell or throw things. The cold clarity that had settled over me at the Thanksgiving table only grew stronger. I walked over to the safe hidden behind a painting in my office and pulled out a thick manila folder. I brought it back to the kitchen island and dropped it next to Terrence's computer. "Let him have his weekend in the sun," I said smoothly, "because by Monday morning he will not have a home to return to." I opened the folder to reveal a perfectly formatted legal document. It was a formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises. Acting as the property management company, I had emailed this exact document to Derek over a month ago. I knew his careless habits perfectly. Derek routinely ignored emails from my corporate email address, assuming they were just automated maintenance updates or community newsletters. He had clicked past it without reading a single word, completely oblivious to the fact that his tenancy had been legally terminated. Terrence reviewed the digital footprint of the email delivery. He nodded his head in approval, his professional demeanor never wavering for a second. "Everything is in order," Terrence confirmed, tapping the screen. The notice was delivered and opened. "The grace period expired at midnight last night. You are operating completely within the boundaries of local property laws. There will be no squatter's rights for him to claim. He is currently holding over on the lease, making him a trespasser as of this morning." Then Terrence noticed another notification pop up on the shared banking server. His eyes narrowed as he clicked into the transaction details. "Claire," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "he just authorized a massive wire transfer to a jewelry boutique in downtown Miami. He is using your primary routing number to purchase something highly expensive. He just committed felony wire fraud." That was the final nail in the coffin. Derek was not just arrogant and unfaithful, he was actively stealing from my business accounts to fund his secret life with a younger woman. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for a 24-hour rapid response moving and security company I frequently used for my real estate properties. The dispatcher answered immediately. "Yes, I have an evicted tenant who has vacated the property," I said, my voice projecting absolute authority. "I need a full residential cleanout starting immediately. I want every single personal item belonging to the tenant packed up and removed by tomorrow morning. Send your best crew. We have a lot of work to do." I ended the call and looked at my sister and brother-in-law. The toxic golden boy thought he could insult me, steal from me, and treat my home like a free hotel. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about respect ownership and the true cost of his arrogance. The purge was about to begin. The silence in the kitchen hung heavy before Terrence turned back to his glowing computer screen. He adjusted his glasses, his fingers flying across the keyboard with the precision of a surgeon. The joint financial portal was just a facade. Terrence dug deeper, bypassing the surface-level accounts Derek assumed were secure. He pulled up the master ledger, his eyes scanning columns of numbers that told a horrifying story of calculated deception. Terrence pointed to a recurring transfer on the digital statement. "Derek has been systematically siphoning money from your secondary operating accounts for over a year, Claire. He masks these transactions as independent contractor payments for his technology firm, but the routing numbers tell a completely different story." Allison leaned over Terrence's shoulder, her eyes widening as she traced the illicit line of transactions. "Where exactly is the stolen money going, Terrence?" Terrence clicked a secured folder, bringing up a complex web of routed funds. "The money is flowing directly into two places. First, a hidden shell account registered in Patricia's name. Derek has been paying her country club dues, covering the lease on her luxury SUV, and funding her weekly spa visits using your hard-earned money. He filters the cash through a dummy vendor name, but the destination account is undeniably registered directly to his mother." Allison slammed her hand against the marble island. Her face was flushed with rage. "He actually let Patricia sit at your Thanksgiving table and call your property flipping business a decorating hobby. She laughed in your face while wearing clothes bought with your stolen money. Does that jerk not know this house is worth $1,200,000? Does he not realize it is owned by your company?" Claire poured herself a fresh glass of water, her expression completely devoid of panic. "He has absolutely no idea," she said, her voice steady and remarkably smooth. Derek is entirely blinded by his own massive ego. He genuinely believes that because he is a man, holding a corporate tech title, he is the undisputed financial anchor of this entire relationship. He assumes my lucrative property management business is just me picking out curtains and throw pillows for other wealthy investors. Terrence brought up another encrypted document on his monitor. Then what exactly does Derek think his massive monthly payments are actually for? He transfers $3,500 directly to you on the first of every month like absolute clockwork. Claire smiled sharply. The corners of her mouth turned up in a look of pure predatory amusement. Derek genuinely thinks his $3,500 a month is actively paying a joint mortgage. 18 months ago, when he desperately begged to move into this house, I handed him a thick stack of legal documents. I told him my corporate lawyers required some standard paperwork for insurance liability and cohabitation clauses. Derek was far too busy watching a football game to bother reading the fine print. He quickly skimmed the first page, proudly bragged about finally being the man of the house, and quickly signed the bottom line. Allison stared at her sister in pure awe. What exactly did he sign, Claire? A completely standard month-to-month residential lease agreement, Claire replied confidently. He is absolutely not a co-owner. He has zero equity in this property. He does not hold a single legal right to the property deed. Derek is nothing more than my temporary tenant. And because he willingly signed a month-to-month agreement, I hold the absolute legal power to terminate his residency at any given time, for any reason with a standard 30-day notice. Terrence let out a low whistle of profound appreciation. You insulated your corporate assets perfectly. He has been actively funding his mother's lavish lifestyle and loudly playing the big shot, all while permanently remaining a temporary renter in your real estate empire. But the situation gets significantly worse. Terrence continued, shifting his intense focus back to the glowing monitor. Patricia is only receiving exactly half of the siphoned funds. The other half is flowing directly into a separate hidden checking account. I am tracking the recent expenditures right now. Luxury dinners, expensive domestic flights, and high-end designer boutiques. Terrence swiftly pulled up a digital receipt. Last month, Derek spent $4,000 on a designer handbag. He shipped it directly to an upscale apartment complex downtown. The recipient name on the shipping label is Skylar. Allison threw her hands wildly in the air, pacing furiously across the kitchen floor. Skylar, the junior sales representative from his office. The 26-year-old who could not stop giggling at his terrible jokes during your holiday party. He is blatantly stealing from your business to fund his mother's vanity and play sugar daddy to his subordinate. Claire, you have to completely ruin him. You have to take everything he cares about and crush it into absolute dust. I fully intend to, Claire said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. Derek desperately wanted a traditional dynamic where he held all the power. He wanted to freely dictate where he went and who he saw, completely unchecked by anyone. He wanted to publicly humiliate me in my own home just to inflate his fragile, pathetic ego. I am going to let his ego be the exact weapon that destroys him permanently. Terrence suddenly stiffened in his chair. He leaned much closer to the monitor, his eyes narrowing sharply behind his glasses. The steady hum of the laptop fan was the only sound in the room as Terrence furiously typed a complex command code. What is it? Allison asked abruptly, stopping her angry pacing. Terrence did not look away from the bright screen. I just intercepted an email notification on the shared server. Derek just authorized a massive wire transfer to a Miami jeweler. Terrence looks up, his eyes narrowing. Claire, he just committed felony wire fraud using your routing number. Terrence's words hung in the air of the kitchen. Felony wire fraud. Allison gripped the edge of the marble island, her knuckles turning white. She demanded we call the police right this second and have Derek arrested the moment he touched down in Florida. She wanted him in handcuffs in front of his precious college buddies. But I placed my hand over her wrist, gently pushing it down. We were not going to involve the police just yet. Handing him over to the authorities immediately would be too quick. It would give him a chance to play the victim, to cry to Patricia about a misunderstanding, to hire a slick defense lawyer to drag out the process. I wanted him to lose his foundation first. I wanted him to return to a reality where his entire carefully constructed facade had been completely decimated. Terrence nodded in agreement, his fingers already moving across his keyboard. He took screenshots of the wire transfer, captured the IP address logged by the bank server, and securely archived the digital signature Derek had forged to bypass the security prompt. Terrence was meticulously building a federal case file, completely bulletproof and ready to deploy the second we needed the ultimate leverage. The financial trap was fully set. Now it was time to spring the physical one. I reached across the island and pulled my laptop toward me. I opened a separate encrypted drive. Allison watched me with a mix of confusion and awe. She asked what else I could possibly have hidden in my files. I told her I had not just been sitting around waiting for Derek to slip up. I had known the relationship was over the moment he started making passive-aggressive comments about my business 3 months ago. I had just been waiting for the legally appropriate time to strike. I clicked on a file labeled Eviction Protocol and opened a formal legal document. I turned the screen so both Allison and Terrence could read it. It was a standard legally binding 30-day notice to vacate. The sender was listed as the generic administrative email address of my LLC, the exact same company name listed on Derek's lease agreement. I pointed to the timestamp. I sent this exactly 30 days ago, I explained smoothly. By New York state law, for a month-to-month tenant with no equity and no fixed-term lease, a 30-day written notice is the absolute gold standard for terminating residency. The clock expired at midnight last night. Allison read over the document, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. She looked up, her forehead creased with worry. She asked if Derek could claim he never received it or that it went to his spam folder. She pointed out that New York housing courts could be notoriously strict about tenant rights and improper service. I smiled, feeling a deep, satisfying warmth spread through my chest. I clicked on the next file in the secure folder. That is the best part about Derek and his monumental ego, I said, bringing up an email thread. He cannot resist the urge to assert his dominance over people he considers beneath him. Read his reply. Terrence leaned in, adjusting his glasses to read the screen. Derek had responded to the formal eviction notice less than an hour after I sent it. He had not forwarded it to me or asked about it. Instead, he replied directly to the property management email address. His response was a masterpiece of arrogant stupidity. Terrence read the email aloud. This is spam. I am the primary resident and co-owner of this property. Stop harassing my inbox with your automated garbage. Tell your lazy property managers to do their actual jobs and fix the sprinkler system instead of sending me fake legal threats. Do not contact this email address again. Terrence let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet kitchen. It was the laugh of a professional who had just seen a hostile witness destroy their own defense on the stand. Allison stared at the screen, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. He acknowledged receipt of the document, Terrence stated, his professional tone returning, but laced with heavy amusement. He replied directly to the notice, proving he read it, understood it was a legal threat, and actively chose to dismiss it. He sealed his fate with his arrogant reply. By claiming co-ownership without any deed or contractual proof, he committed a material breach of the lease terms. And by explicitly telling the management company to never contact him again, he waived any right to further warnings or secondary notifications. He handed you a legally flawless eviction on a silver platter. I nodded, closing the laptop screen with a satisfying snap. I had consulted with my own real estate attorney before sending the initial notice. The lawyer had assured me that as long as Derek acknowledged receipt, the eviction was completely ironclad. There would be absolutely no squatter rights for him to exploit. There would be no lengthy housing court battles. He was not a victim of a sudden illegal lockout. He was a tenant who had brazenly ignored a lawful order to vacate the premises because he thought he was untouchable. He thought the rules did not apply to him. Allison looked around the massive kitchen, taking in the expensive appliances, the custom cabinetry, and the life Derek had so comfortably claimed as his own doing. She asked what the next step was, her voice vibrating with eager anticipation. The financial audit was complete. The legal groundwork was absolutely flawless. The 30-day grace period had officially ended. It was time to physically remove the infection from my property. I picked up my phone and dialed a 24-hour rapid response moving and security company. "Yes," I said clearly into the receiver. "I have an evicted tenant. I need a full property clean out by tomorrow morning." The phone screen illuminated my face as I stared at the confirmation number. Terrence immediately pivoted back to his keyboard. He did not need a verbal command to know what came next. While Derek was busy committing federal crimes in Florida, they were going to dismantle his entire financial safety net in New York. Allison grabbed a stack of moving boxes from the garage and slammed them onto the kitchen island. The contrast between the two worlds was staggering. On Allison's phone screen, Derek had just uploaded a new Instagram story. He was standing on the deck of a rented luxury yacht, wearing the exact linen shirt I had bought him for his birthday. He raised a glass of expensive champagne toward the camera, a smug grin plastered across his face. Beside him, leaning into his shoulder, was Skylar. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that looked suspiciously like the one Derek had just purchased with my stolen routing number. The caption across the video read, "Living the dream with the best company, completely unbothered." I snatched a roll of packing tape and ripped off a piece with a violent tear. He was unbothered because he believed he was untouchable. He believed he had manipulated a wealthy, independent woman into subsidizing a lavish fantasy life for him and his subordinate. He thought his Thanksgiving dinner performance had put me in my place. He had no idea that his entire reality was currently being systematically dismantled box by box. I directed Allison to the master bedroom to secure my jewelry, legal documents, and personal electronics. We were not going to leave a single valuable item unsecured while strangers were in the house. Terrence remained stationed at the kitchen island, transforming my granite countertop into a financial war room. He began executing a series of digital tripwires with ruthless precision. He tracked down every secondary credit card Derek possessed that was remotely linked to my primary accounts. Derek had a platinum travel card, a premium dining card, and an exclusive membership card for a private golf club in the Hamptons. Terrence systematically froze every single one of them. He flagged the Miami jewelry transaction as fraudulent, freezing the merchant transfer and triggering an immediate security lockdown on Derek's digital wallet. When Derek attempts to buy his next round of yacht drinks, every piece of plastic in his wallet is going to decline, Terrence announced, his eyes never leaving the scrolling data on his monitor. I have also severed his access to the shared cloud storage and revoked his authorization for the driveway security gates. He is completely locked out of the digital ecosystem. I nodded, packing my antique silver into a reinforced crate. Derek relied heavily on the illusion of wealth to maintain his social status. Without my credit limit to prop him up, he was just a mid-level sales director with a leased sports car and a massive ego. The heavy rumble of diesel engines interrupted the quiet focus in the house. I looked out the front window to see two massive moving trucks backing into the circular driveway. The side panels bore the crisp, professional logo of the Rapid Response Eviction Team. 6 men in matching uniforms piled out of the cabs carrying heavy-duty dollies, protective blankets, and specialized packing materials. I unlocked the front door and let the crew chief inside. I handed him the authorized property manifest and pointed directly toward the primary guest suite, which Derek had forcefully claimed as his personal sanctuary the day he moved in. I need every item in that room, the master closet and the garage removed immediately, I instructed clearly. Everything belonging to the tenant goes into the trucks. Do not leave a single sock behind. The experienced moving crew moved with absolutely breathtaking efficiency. They did not ask questions. They simply executed the job. 2 men headed straight for the custom closet I had built, pulling down Derek's ridiculous collection of tailored Italian suits, silk ties, and custom dress shoes. Another team tackled the garage, hauling out his $5,000 golf clubs, his expensive mountain bike, and boxes of high-end tech gadgets he had ordered using my corporate discount codes. They worked like a well-oiled machine, wrapping his oversized leather armchair in plastic and wheeling it out the front door. Allison stood in the hallway watching the movers dismantle Derek's footprint from my home. She leaned against the wall, a deeply satisfied expression on her face. Seeing his stuff get hauled away like trash is the best early Christmas present I could ever ask for, she remarked. Watching a mover carry out a ridiculous, oversized humidor Derek had insisted on displaying. I stood beside her, watching the space slowly empty out. The heavy, oppressive energy Derek brought into my house was lifting with every box they carried out the door. My home was becoming mine again. The crew chief approached me in the foyer, holding a clipboard for my signature. "We are loading the last of the electronics from the office now, ma'am," he reported. "We should have the property completely cleared in the next 10 minutes. I slowly took the pen to sign the release form, feeling a profound sense of closure washing over me. But before the pen could touch the paper, a sharp metallic sound shattered the calm. The heavy brass handle on the front door jiggled aggressively. Someone was aggressively twisting a key in the deadbolt lock, trying to force it open. I held up my hand, signaling the moving crew to freeze instantly. The men stopped in their tracks, lowering a flat-screen television to the floor. The deadbolt clicked very loudly. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing the crisp autumn afternoon. Patricia stood on the welcome mat, her hand still gripping the door handle, freezing in absolute shock as her eyes darted from the uniformed movers to the empty spaces where her son's belongings used to be. Patricia stood frozen in the doorway, her manicured hand still gripping the heavy brass handle of the front door. The crisp autumn breeze swept past her, ruffling the collar of her expensive coat, but she did not seem to notice the cold. Her wide, incredulous eyes darted frantically around the foyer, taking in the chaotic scene before her. 6 men in matching company uniforms were systematically dismantling the luxurious life her golden boy had so carefully arranged. 2 movers expertly navigated the curved oak staircase, carrying Derek's custom leather recliner right past her. Another team was marching out of the garage with his expensive golf clubs and cycling equipment. The sheer volume of boxes being loaded into the massive trucks parked in the circular driveway told a story of absolute undeniable finality. For a long moment, the only sounds in the house were the heavy thud of work boots and the sharp tear of packing tape. Then the shock on Patricia's face dissolved, replaced by a vicious, burning rage. Her features contorted into a mask of pure indignation. She dropped her designer handbag onto the entryway console with a loud, aggressive smack and stormed directly into the kitchen, her heels clicking furiously against the hardwood floor. "What in the world do you think you are doing?" Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceilings. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her face flushing a deep, angry shade of crimson. "Are you completely out of your mind, Claire? You are boxing up my son's belongings like some kind of common criminal. Stop these men right now. Tell them to put every single item back exactly where they found it." I did not flinch or raise my voice. I simply stood by the marble island, calmly wrapping a delicate crystal vase in protective bubble wrap. I instructed the crew chief to keep working and completely ignore the disruption. The movers, consummate professionals who had clearly seen every flavor of domestic meltdown, barely broke their stride. They continued hauling armloads of expensive silk shirts and designer jackets out the front door, slipping past Patricia as if she were nothing more than a minor architectural obstacle. Patricia's chest heaved as she watched another box of Derek's expensive tech gadgets disappear into the back of the moving truck. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing with absolute venom. "You are a thief," she spat out, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You are a pathetic, worthless art school dropout who finally realized she could never measure up to a man like Derek. He is a successful technology director. He provides everything for you. He practically rescued you from your little decorating hobby, and this is how you repay him, by robbing him blind the second he leaves town for a well-deserved vacation." Allison took a sudden, aggressive step forward, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. She was practically vibrating with the urge to scream the truth right into Patricia's incredibly arrogant face. But I placed a firm hand on my sister's shoulder, holding her back. Letting Patricia unravel and humiliate herself was a crucial part of the process. I wanted to see exactly how far she would go to defend a man who was actively stealing to fund his infidelity. You have absolutely no right to touch a single thread of his clothing. Patricia continued, her volume escalating as she attempted to assert her absolute dominance over the situation. Derek pays the mortgage on this massive house. He pays for the utilities. He pays for your lifestyle. Derek owns this house, Claire. He is the master of this property, and you are just the ungrateful girlfriend living under his very generous roof. I am calling the police right now, and I will have you arrested for burglarizing my son. You are going to spend the weekend in a holding cell while he is relaxing with his friends. She reached into her coat pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out her phone. She held it up like a weapon, glaring triumphantly as she dialed 911. She pressed the phone to her ear, tapping her foot impatiently against the floorboards. She fully expected me to panic. She expected me to beg her to hang up the phone, to apologize profusely, and to desperately try to fix the situation before the authorities arrived. She expected the same submissive silence I had offered her at the Thanksgiving dinner table. Instead, I simply offered her a serene, ice-cold smile. I did not stop the movers. I gestured for them to keep taking the furniture out of the guest suite. They carried out his expensive gaming monitors and his imported espresso machine, marching right past Patricia while she spoke to the emergency dispatcher. "Yes, I need officers at this address immediately," Patricia barked into the phone, her voice dripping with artificial panic. "My son's ex-girlfriend is actively robbing his home. She has hired thugs to steal all of his expensive belongings while he is out of town. Yes, the homeowner is Derek Wilson. Please send someone right away before she destroys his property." She ended the call with a satisfied sigh and crossed her arms over her chest. Terrence, who had been silently observing the unhinged performance from his workstation, finally stepped forward. He calmly closed his laptop, adjusted his tie with deliberate movements, and checked his wristwatch. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and looked Patricia dead in the eye. "Please do call them, ma'am," Terrence said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "It will save us the trouble." The faint, unmistakable wail of sirens pierced the crisp autumn air. The sound grew rapidly louder. Red and blue lights began to flash wildly through the large bay windows of the living room. Patricia smirked, lifting her chin proudly as she turned to watch the police cruisers pull into the driveway. She thought she had won. Two uniformed police officers stepped through the open front door, their heavy-duty boots thudding against the polished oak floorboards. The flashing red and blue lights from their cruisers cast long, dramatic shadows across the foyer walls. Before either officer could even announce their presence or ask a single question, Patricia launched into the performance of a lifetime. Her smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of absolute terror and devastation. She clutched her chest, letting out a perfectly calculated gasp, and rushed toward the taller of the two officers. "Thank God you are here!" she cried, her voice trembling with manufactured hysteria. She pointed a manicured finger directly at me, tears welling up in her eyes on command. "That woman has completely lost her mind. My son is out of town on a business trip, and his ex-girlfriend has hired these thugs to rob him blind. She is trying to steal everything he owns. She is burglarizing his home right in front of me." The officers immediately placed their hands on their duty belts, their eyes scanning the massive living room. They took in the sight of the moving crew, the stacked boxes, and the half-empty guest suite. The taller officer held up a hand to pause the closest mover, who was currently carrying a stack of Derek's expensive silk ties. "Hold on a second, nobody move." The officer commanded, his tone authoritative and firm. He turned his attention back to me, his expression hardened by suspicion. "Ma'am, are you removing these items without the homeowner's consent?" Before I could open my mouth to answer, Patricia pushed herself forward again, not wanting to lose her momentum. "She does not own a single thing in this beautiful house," Patricia wailed dramatically, wiping a tear from her cheek. "My son pays the mortgage. He pays all the bills. He graciously let her stay here because her little decorating business makes absolutely no money. And the second he leaves, she orchestrates this massive criminal conspiracy. You have to arrest her right now. Put her in handcuffs before they load another truck." I did not raise my voice. I did not attempt to defend myself against her ridiculous, frantic accusations. I simply maintained my calm posture and gestured for the movers to set the boxes down gently. This was the exact moment we had meticulously planned for. Terrence stepped forward from the kitchen island, his demeanor so exceptionally calm and professional that it immediately diffused the escalating tension in the room. He did not yell. He did not match Patricia's frantic energy. He simply adjusted his tie, smoothed the front of his impeccably tailored suit, and walked directly toward the two officers. "Gentlemen, my name is Terrence, and I am the financial and legal representative for the corporate entity that holds the deed to this property," he said, his voice projecting absolute authority and competence. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, meticulously organized binder lined with brightly colored tabs. He handed it directly to the taller officer. Patricia scoffed loudly, waving her hand in dismissal. "Do not listen to him," she yelled. "He is part of the scam. He is helping her steal my son's life." Terrence ignored her completely, keeping his focus locked firmly on the police. "Officers, if you turn to the first red tab, you will find the official property deed," Terrence instructed smoothly. "As you can clearly see, this $1.2 million estate is owned entirely by a private limited liability company. It is not owned by Derek Wilson. It never has been." The officer opened the binder, his eyes scanning the official state seals and corporate signatures. Terrence did not miss a single beat. Under the second blue tab, you will find the standard month-to-month residential lease agreement that Mr. Derek Wilson signed 18 months ago. He is not a homeowner. He holds absolutely zero equity. He is simply a tenant. And finally, under the third yellow tab, you will find the formal 30-day notice to vacate, which was legally served and digitally acknowledged by the tenant exactly 1 month ago. Terrence pointed to a specific printed email thread. "The grace period expired at midnight last night. The tenant is currently holding over on an expired lease." They checked the names, matched the signatures, and read Derek's own arrogant email reply, where he explicitly acknowledged the eviction notice and demanded the property management company stop bothering him. The aggressive, suspicious posture the officers had entered with completely vanished. The taller officer closed the heavy binder and handed it back to Terrence with a respectful nod. He turned slowly toward Patricia, his demeanor hardening into stone. Patricia was still panting, waiting for the dramatic arrest she had ordered. Instead, the officer looked at her with blatant irritation. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter and a completely legal eviction," the officer stated firmly, his voice echoing in the quiet foyer. "The paperwork is flawless. The property owner has every legal right to remove these belongings from the premises. There is absolutely no burglary happening here." Patricia's jaw dropped. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. "That is impossible," she stammered, her voice losing all of its previous volume. "Derek told me he bought this house. He told me he provided for her." "You are reading fake documents." The second officer completely ignored her desperate, frantic rambling and pulled out his official leather notepad, stepping closer. "We need to see your identification right now, ma'am." "Why?" Patricia demanded, clutching her designer purse to her chest. "Because the legal property owner has requested we trespass you from the premises. Ma'am, you need to leave immediately or you will be arrested." The taller police officer stepped firmly toward Patricia, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. He pointed toward the open doorway, his voice dropping into a register that demanded immediate compliance. Patricia stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the threshold. She clutched her leather handbag to her chest, as if seeking protection from the sheer humiliation. Her mouth opened and closed silently before a barrage of vicious insults erupted from her lips. She called me a manipulative fraud, a gold digger, and every other derogatory name she could invent. The officers remained entirely unmoved by her theatrical meltdown. They flanked her on either side and physically escorted her off the front porch. Patricia marched down the paved walkway, waving her arms wildly in the air. She screamed at the moving crew, threatening to sue their entire company into bankruptcy. She promised to call the mayor, the governor, and the local news stations. I stood calmly in this doorway and watched her retreat. Once she reached the public sidewalk, she spun around. her face twisted with a level of rage I had never seen from her before. She shrieked that Derek would destroy me the minute he returned. I simply smiled, reached out and pulled the heavy oak door shut. The deadbolt engaged with a loud, satisfying click, instantly silencing her frantic threats. I turned around to face the foyer. The house was remarkably quiet. The moving team finished loading the last few boxes with efficiency. Within 15 minutes, the massive trucks pulled out of the circular driveway, taking every single trace of Derek Wilson away with them. I walked through the primary guest suite, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floors. The space felt entirely different. The oppressive, heavy energy that had suffocated these rooms for 18 months was completely gone. But simply emptying the physical space was not nearly enough. Derek had treated this house like his own personal kingdom, imposing his terrible taste on my property. I pulled my phone from my pocket and navigated to my contacts list. I dialed the direct number for my lead contractor, a man named Hector, who managed all the heavy renovations for my real estate flipping company. Hector answered on the second ring. I told him I needed a demolition crew at my primary residence immediately. I explained that I was doing an emergency aesthetic reset and needed his team to haul away debris. He promised to send his best guys within the hour. Allison watched me end the call, a massive grin spreading across her face. Terrence folded his arms, clearly amused by the escalating scale of my operation. I walked toward the back hallway, gesturing for my sister and brother-in-law to follow me. We stopped in front of a closed door at the end of the corridor. It was the entrance to the room Derek proudly called his absolute sanctuary. I pushed the door open, revealing the space Derek referred to as his man cave. It was an absolute architectural nightmare. Against my explicit wishes, he had painted the walls a dark, gloomy charcoal gray. He had installed heavy blackout curtains that blocked every ounce of natural sunlight. He had mounted floating shelves to display empty bottles of expensive liquor and sports memorabilia. The room felt like a depressing, windowless dungeon, perfectly reflecting the toxic masculinity he projected onto the world. I walked over to the corner of the room where the moving crew had thoughtfully left behind a few construction tools from the garage. I picked up a heavy steel-handled sledgehammer. The weight of the tool felt perfectly balanced in my hands. I turned to Allison and extended the sledgehammer toward her. "Let us get some natural light in here," I said smoothly. Allison's eyes widened with pure, unadulterated joy. She grabbed the handle, gripping it tightly. We walked toward the center dividing wall, a flimsy, non-load-bearing partition Derek had insisted on building to separate his gaming area from his home office desk. Allison swung the hammer back and drove it forward with incredible force. The heavy steel head smashed directly into the dark gray drywall. The sharp sound of cracking plaster echoed loudly through the entire house. A cloud of fine white dust exploded into the air. She pulled the hammer back and swung again, widening the jagged hole. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolkit and joined her, ripping down large chunks of the ruined drywall. We dismantled the physical manifestation of his ego, tearing down the walls piece by piece until the room was flooded with bright, clean light from the adjoining windows. Once the demolition was complete, Hector's crew arrived to clear out the massive piles of plaster and debris. While they worked, I moved to the central control panel located in the main hallway. I accessed the digital interface for the home security system. I completely wiped Derek's biometric data from the server, deleting his fingerprints and facial recognition profiles. I changed the master passcodes for the front door, the garage, and the perimeter gates. I reprogrammed the smart locks with a complex new sequence, ensuring his old keys and digital access tokens were instantly rendered entirely useless. My home was now a perfectly sealed fortress. I walked back into the pristine kitchen, dusting a faint trace of drywall powder from my sleeves. Terrence opened a bottle of reserve red wine. He poured 3 generous glasses, handing them across the marble island. We raised our glasses in a silent, unified toast to absolute freedom and flawless execution. The rich, bold flavor of the wine tasted like pure victory. I set my glass down on the counter and glanced at my phone. A bright banner notification suddenly illuminated the screen. It was an automated alert from the flight tracking application I had secretly installed on my device weeks ago. I stared at the digital text, a cold, calculating thrill washing over me. Derek's flight from Miami had landed. The black luxury SUV rolled to a smooth stop at the base of the long, circular driveway. Derek pushed the heavy passenger door open and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. He stretched his arms above his head, wincing as the movement pulled at the tight, peeling sunburn across his shoulders. His head throbbed with the dull ache of a premium champagne hangover, the toll of 4 days partying on a Miami yacht with Skylar. Despite the pounding in his temples, a smug smile plastered itself across his face. He pulled his duffel bag from the trunk, slamming the tailgate completely shut without thanking the hired driver. He strutted up the paved walkway, oblivious to the changes around the property. He did not notice the absence of his mountain bike leaning against the side gate. He did not notice the heavy dark curtains were now pulled wide open, flooding the interior spaces with natural light. All Derek cared about was getting inside, dropping his laundry on the floor for Claire to wash, and demanding a hot meal. He spent the flight formulating exactly how he would assert his dominance tonight. He planned to act cold and distant, punishing Claire for her little outburst at Thanksgiving. He expected her to be waiting in the kitchen, desperate to apologize and win back his affection. Derek marched up the front porch steps and approached the door. He confidently raised his hand and punched his personalized 6-digit code into the keypad of the smart lock. He waited for the familiar click of the deadbolt disengaging. Instead, the keypad flashed a bright red. A loud error tone buzzed in the quiet afternoon air. Derek frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in irritation. He assumed he simply mistyped the numbers due to his exhaustion. He shook his head, muttered a curse under his breath, and typed the sequence again, pressing each button with exaggerated precision. Red light, error tone. His irritation flared into genuine anger. He smacked the keypad with the flat of his palm. He assumed Claire had somehow messed with the Smart Home Hub application while trying to fix the network. She was always terrible with technology, he thought bitterly. He dropped his duffel bag onto the porch with a loud thud and unzipped the front pocket. He dug past his sunglasses and a crumpled yacht club receipt to find his emergency physical key. He never used the metal key, but he kept it specifically for moments of technical failure. He jammed the brass key into the deadbolt cylinder. He gripped the head of the key and twisted it sharply to the right. It refused to budge. The metal ground against the internal pins misaligned. Derek gritted his teeth, yanking the key out and shoving it back in. He twisted it to the left. He twisted it to the right again. He put his entire body weight into the motion, nearly snapping the brass key in half. The lock remained immovable. The realization that the physical hardware had been completely altered finally pierced through his arrogant haze. The lock was not jammed. It was brand new. His face flushed a crimson that perfectly matched his sunburn. He grabbed the heavy brass door handle and jerked it downward, jiggling it back and forth. The heavy door rattled slightly in its frame, but held fast. He let go of the handle and slammed his closed fists against the solid oak wood. "Claire!" He roared, his voice cracking with absolute rage. "Claire, open this door right now! I know you are in there. Open this door immediately." He pounded his fists against the wood again and again, the heavy thuds echoing loudly across the quiet neighborhood. He stepped back, kicking the base of the door with his loafer. He was practically foaming at the mouth, completely losing the composed persona he had practiced on the airplane. He pressed his face against the narrow glass pane beside the door, desperately trying to peer inside, but the new privacy frosting Claire applied blocked his view. The chaotic display did not go unnoticed. Next door, the screen door of the adjacent house creaked open. Mrs. Higgins, the elderly widow who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, stepped onto her wraparound porch. She was wearing a floral gardening apron over her sensible clothes. In her left hand, she carried a watering can. In her right hand, she held a condensation-covered glass of sweet iced tea. Mrs. Higgins had never liked Derek. She had seen right through his corporate charm from the very first day he moved his ridiculous sports car into Claire's garage. She watched him speed through the streets, and she heard the way he barked orders at the landscaping crew. Now she stood comfortably on her porch, watering a hanging fern with slow, methodical precision. She watched Derek's meltdown with a look of supreme amusement. Derek spun around, catching movement out of the corner of his eye. He saw the elderly woman watching him calmly. His chest heaved as he pointed an aggressive finger toward the front door. "Hey!" he yelled across the manicured lawns, abandoning any shred of basic neighborhood decency. "Do you know what is wrong with this stupid door? Did you see Claire messing with the lock today?" Mrs. Higgins did not flinch at his tone. She finished watering her fern carefully, setting the can down on a small wicker table. She turned her full attention to the furious sunburned man throwing a childish temper tantrum on the front porch. She raised her right hand, bringing the cold glass to her lips. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her iced tea, savoring the cool liquid. She lowered the glass, a brilliant, knowing smile wrinkling the corners of her eyes. "Nothing is wrong with the door, dear," Mrs. Higgins called back, her voice projecting clearly across the distance. "The owner just changed the locks. She said the old tenant was evicted." Derek stared at Mrs. Higgins, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The elderly woman simply offered him a cheerful wave, turned around and walked back inside her house, letting the screen door slap shut behind her. The absolute humiliation of the moment finally broke through his alcohol-fueled haze. Panic, cold and sharp, suddenly replaced the burning anger in his chest. He looked back at the frosted glass of the front door, the shiny new lock mocking him. He frantically dug his phone out of his pocket. His hands were shaking so violently, he almost dropped the device on the concrete porch. He pulled up my contact and jammed his thumb against the call button, pressing the phone tightly to his ear. Inside the house, my phone began to vibrate violently against the polished marble surface of the kitchen island. The caller identification flashed brightly, displaying Derek's name alongside an old photograph of him posing in one of his absurdly expensive custom suits. I stood nearby, my safety goggles pushed up securely onto my forehead, and a heavy steel crowbar resting comfortably in my right hand. Terrence and Allison immediately stopped talking. The entire house fell completely silent, save for the insistent buzzing of the phone. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute power of this single moment. I reached across the cool marble, tapped the green accept button, and immediately switched the call to speakerphone. Before I could even offer a greeting, Derek's voice exploded from the small device, echoing loudly off the high ceilings of the kitchen. "Claire, open this door right now!" Derek screamed. His voice was frantic, pitched high with a mixture of disbelief and absolute rage. "What in the world is going on here? Why is my key not working? Did you actually change the locks on my house? You are acting completely crazy. Let me inside there immediately." I leaned forward, resting my palms flat against the kitchen island. I kept my voice perfectly level, stripping away any trace of emotion. I was ice cold, detached, and completely in control. "You made yourself very clear before you left for your trip," I replied smoothly. "You told me that I do not get a say in where you go or who you spend your time with." I paused, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second. "You were absolutely right, Derek. But I do get a say in who occupies the property my limited liability company owns. Your lease is officially terminated. You do not live here anymore." There was a sharp gasp on the other end of the line. You could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to process the reality of his situation. He was no longer the master of the house. He was just a trespasser standing on the wrong side of a locked door. "You cannot do this to me," he stammered, his bravado rapidly dissolving into genuine panic. "We are together. We live together. You cannot just kick me out onto the street. You have absolutely no legal right to do this to me." I gestured toward Allison, nodding my head toward the hallway leading to his former sanctuary. She smiled, picked up the heavy sledgehammer, and walked directly toward the partially demolished wall. "I am not kicking you out," I corrected him calmly. "I am simply enforcing the legal eviction notice you chose to completely ignore while you were busy drinking champagne on a yacht in Miami with your subordinate." Right on cue, Allison swung the sledgehammer with devastating force. The heavy steel head crashed into the remaining section of the dark gray drywall. The deafening, violent sound of shattering plaster and splintering wood blasted through the speakerphone. Derek stopped breathing. The silence on his end of the line was absolute, followed immediately by a frantic, high-pitched squeak. What was that noise? Derek demanded, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. What exactly are you doing in there, Claire? What is happening to my beautiful house? Allison swung the hammer again, bringing down another massive chunk of the wall. The sound of destruction echoed like a symphony of sweet revenge. We are doing some renovations, I stated casually. We are getting some natural light into that dark, depressing little man cave of yours. It is going to make a fabulous, bright, and airy yoga studio. No. Derek shrieked, the panic now fully consuming him. You cannot destroy my room. Where are my things? Where is my computer? Where are my $5,000 golf clubs and my tailored Italian suits? You better not have touched my custom wardrobe. I picked up my wine glass, taking a slow, appreciative sip of the rich red vintage. I smiled, looking at Terrence and Allison, who were both watching the phone with expressions of immense satisfaction. Your belongings are perfectly safe, I assured him, my voice dripping with mock sweetness. They were packed up by a professional moving crew this afternoon. They did not leave a single sock behind. Where are they? Derek demanded, his breathing shallow and rapid. Tell me where my stuff is right now, Claire. I set the wine glass back down on the marble counter. Your belongings are securely locked in storage unit 4B on the extreme east edge of town, I announced cheerfully. It is a very rough, dangerous neighborhood, Derek. They have had a lot of break-ins recently. I would hurry if I were you. You do not want anyone stealing those expensive suits before you have a chance to rescue them. He let out a strangled cry of pure frustration. Give me the access code, he demanded. Give me the code right now so I can get my things. I smiled, leaning closer to the microphone. The access code is very easy to remember, I whispered softly. It is Skylar's birth year. I reached out and tapped the bright red button, ending the phone call instantly. Derek stared at the darkened screen of his phone, his mind struggling to process the abrupt dial tone. The sheer, unadulterated disrespect of being hung up on was too much for his inflated ego to handle. He stood on the front porch, the autumn wind suddenly feeling much colder against his sunburned skin. Across the manicured lawn, Mrs. Higgins was still watching him, her lemonade resting casually in her hand. The absolute emasculation of the moment burned through him like a physical fire. He was an executive, a man who commanded entire departments, and here he was, locked out of what he considered his own kingdom, being mocked by the neighborhood gossip. He furiously stabbed at his phone screen, hitting redial. He paced the length of the porch, his expensive leather loafers slapping aggressively against the concrete. When Claire finally answered on the fourth ring, he did not even give her a chance to speak. You listen to me, you psychotic fraud, Derek bellowed, his voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. You cannot just lock me out and throw my property into some cheap storage unit. I have massive sweat equity in that house. I spent months overseeing the landscaping and designing my personal office. Furthermore, my monthly payments of $3,500 were not rent. They were a direct investment. That makes me a co-owner of this property, and you know it. You are legally bound to give me full access to my own home. Inside the house, the rhythmic crashing of the sledgehammers momentarily paused. Claire stood amidst the settling dust, her expression perfectly serene. Sweat equity does not override a legally binding lease agreement, Derek, she stated, her voice as flat and unyielding as a sheet of ice. And your monthly payments were clearly defined as rent in the contract you signed. You own absolutely nothing here. Derek scoffed loudly, a harsh, desperate sound. You really think your little contracts are going to protect you? He sneered, his anger morphing into a vicious, calculated attack. I am going to sue you for millions, Claire. I am going to drag you through court until you have absolutely nothing left. We have been living together for well over a year now. That automatically constitutes a common law marriage in the eyes of any decent judge. Half of everything you currently own belongs to me, including that house, and whatever profits you made off your ridiculous little real estate flipping hobby. I will legally take the cars, the bank accounts, and every single stolen asset you are trying to hide from me." He stopped pacing, pointing an accusatory finger at the frosted glass of the front door. "You are an absolute nobody without my tech salary," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Who do you realistically think paid for the luxurious lifestyle you have been enjoying? My massive income funded your entire pathetic existence. You were just riding my coattails pretending to be a highly successful businesswoman. The exact minute I finally walk into a courtroom, they will immediately see you for exactly what you truly are: a manipulative, pathetic gold digger who tried to blindly steal from a remarkably successful corporate executive." Claire calmly listened to his unhinged tirade without interrupting. She did not ever raise her voice. She did not take the obvious bait. She simply let him completely exhaust his arrogant, delusional vocabulary. "Are you quite finished?" she asked smoothly. Her absolute lack of any emotional response infuriated him even more. He opened his mouth to rapidly launch another ridiculous barrage of vicious insults, but she firmly cut him off. "I do not have the spare time or the slight inclination to argue with a sweaty trespasser on my front porch, Derek. If you genuinely believe you have a valid legal claim to my numerous corporate assets, then you should absolutely pursue it." She paused, and Derek could almost clearly hear her smiling broadly through the phone. "In fact, I highly encourage it. Bring your very best lawyer to my main corporate office tomorrow morning at exactly 10 o'clock. We can easily settle this silly dispute professionally. The building address is located in the email I sent you, officially confirming your immediate lease termination. Do not be late." Before Derek could even begin to verbally formulate a response, the line went dead for the second time. He pulled the expensive phone away from his ear, staring at it as if the tiny device itself had viciously betrayed him. He let out a loud, primal yell, aggressively kicking his heavy duffel bag violently off the wooden porch and directly into the meticulously trimmed hydrangeas. He absolutely needed serious backup. He desperately needed someone who fundamentally understood exactly how to completely destroy a smug person like Claire. His sunburned hands were visibly shaking as he frantically navigated through his digital contacts and hastily dialed his mother. The phone barely managed to ring before it was immediately answered. Mom. Derek breathlessly started, his strained voice a chaotic mixture of deep rage and blind panic. "You are obviously not going to easily believe what she actually did. She completely changed the door locks. She mercilessly threw all my priceless stuff straight into a storage unit. She is arrogantly trying to confidently say I have absolutely no rights to the house." On the other distant end of the cellular line, Patricia slowly took a sharp, remarkably ragged breath. Her distinct voice when she finally spoke was audibly trembling with a cold, uniquely terrifying fury. "I frankly know exactly what she violently did," Derek. Patricia viciously hissed, the shrill sound carrying a long lifetime of elite, unchecked entitlement and toxic vindictiveness. "The arrogant little tramp had the local police physically remove me from the front property earlier today. She completely humiliated me in front of everyone. Do not worry, honey. I have already hired Todd. We are going to take everything that manipulative little witch currently owns right now." The glass double doors of my downtown property management office normally provided a serene barrier against the chaotic energy of the city. The space was deliberately designed to project quiet authority, featuring polished concrete floors, minimalist white desks, and large panoramic windows overlooking the bustling financial district. I sat behind my custom walnut desk reviewing a series of commercial lease agreements, completely unbothered by the inevitable storm heading my way. That tranquility shattered precisely at 10 sharp. The heavy glass doors violently swung open, banging against the metal stops. My receptionist, a sharp young woman named Chloe, stood up immediately, raising her hand to halt the intruders. Her professional objections were entirely ignored. Derek marched into the reception area with his chin held high, radiating a desperate manufactured confidence. He was flanked by two people who perfectly encapsulated his toxic ecosystem. On his left was his mother, Patricia, wearing a tweed power suit and an expression of pure, unadulterated venom. On his right was Todd, a loud, heavy-set man squeezed into a cheap pinstripe suit that shrieked of desperation in late-night television commercials. Todd clutched a battered leather briefcase like it was a weapon. They completely bypassed Chloe, ignoring her demands that they wait to be announced, and bulldozed straight into my private office. Patricia led the charge. She marched directly up to my desk, planted her manicured hands flat on the polished walnut surface, and leaned forward until we were practically breathing the exact same air. She glared at me with a level of absolute contempt that I had frankly grown quite accustomed to over the past 18 months. "You really thought you could get away with this?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with a terrifying self-righteous fury. "You thought you could trick my successful son into funding your pathetic, failed little life and then just throw him out onto the street when you were done leeching off his hard-earned money? You are nothing but a common scam artist, Claire. You saw a wealthy, generous man, and you sank your claws into him because you knew you could never build anything of value on your own." Derek stood just behind her right shoulder, crossing his arms over his chest. His sunburn had faded slightly, but the arrogant smirk plastered across his face had returned with a vengeance. He clearly believed that having his mommy and his aggressively loud lawyer in the room magically insulated him from reality. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or offer any emotional reaction to Patricia and her vicious, toxic worldview. I simply leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, picked up my ceramic coffee mug, and took a slow, methodical sip of my dark roast blend. I let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment. My lack of panic clearly unsettled them, but before Patricia could launch into another tirade, Todd stepped forward. He puffed out his chest, completely invading my personal space, and slammed his briefcase onto my pristine desk. "Listen to me very closely, little lady Todd," boomed his voice, deliberately loud and obnoxious, attempting to intimidate me with pure volume. "You have stepped into a legal minefield, and you are about to lose your legs. I am representing Derek in this matter, and we are holding all the winning cards. You illegally locked my client out of his primary residence. That is a textbook case of constructive eviction. Furthermore, you have been funneling his massive tech salary to float your failing real estate business. We are looking at massive unjust enrichment, extreme emotional distress, and serious claims for spousal support equivalents based on the length and financial nature of your cohabitation." Todd leaned over the desk, pointing a stubby, accusatory finger directly at my face. He smiled, revealing a row of stained teeth. "We are not here to play games," he growled. "We are here to offer you one single, exceptionally generous way out of this nightmare. You are going to write my client a certified check for exactly $200,000 right now. In exchange, Derek will graciously agree to walk away and leave you to your miserable little life. If you refuse to pay, I will personally tie you up in aggressive litigation for a decade. I will freeze your corporate assets, drag your LLC through the mud, and absolutely bankrupt you with legal fees. You will be living out of a cardboard box by the time I am finished destroying your company." Derek nodded enthusiastically, pointing at me. "You hear that, Claire?" He gloated, his voice dripping with pure malice. "You are completely finished. Pay up or lose everything." I set my coffee mug down on the walnut desk, ensuring the ceramic base clicked softly against the wood. I looked at Derek, then at Patricia, and finally at Todd. I did not offer a single word of defense. I did not argue about the blatant lies, the twisted facts, or the ridiculous threats of unending litigation. I simply maintained eye contact with Todd and offered a very faint, knowing smile. The heavy glass door to the adjacent conference room suddenly clicked open. The sharp, authoritative sound of expensive leather dress shoes stepping onto the polished concrete floor echoed through my quiet office. Derek, Patricia, and Todd all turned their heads simultaneously to see who was interrupting their carefully choreographed ambush. Terrence walked out of the conference room looking absolutely immaculate in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray Italian suit. He exuded an aura of calm, devastating power. In his right hand, he casually carried a thick, heavy leather-bound portfolio. He walked directly toward my desk, bypassing Derek and Patricia, as if they were nothing more than minor inconveniences blocking his path. He stopped right beside my chair, placing the heavy portfolio onto the walnut surface. "Well, good morning," Todd Terrence said smoothly, his deep voice carrying absolute authority. "I truly believe you are looking at the wrong ledger." Terrence moved with a quiet, lethal grace. He pulled out the ergonomic chair beside me and sat down carefully, resting his thick leather portfolio on the desk. He adjusted his silk tie, his expression the picture of professional indifference. Todd let out a loud, obnoxious snort, leaning back on his heels. He looked Terrence up and down with obvious disdain. "And who exactly is this supposed to be?" Todd asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Is this your little paralegal, Claire? Did you bring your assistant in here to take notes while I dismantle your entire life?" Terrence did not react to the insult. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket, retrieved a crisp, heavy stock business card, and slid it across the smooth walnut surface. It stopped exactly an inch from Todd's thick fingers. Todd snatched the card, his eyes scanning the elegant, embossed text. Terrence folded his hands neatly on the desk. "I am not a paralegal, Todd," Terrence said, his voice a rich, unbothered baritone. "I am a forensic accountant and the primary financial officer for Claire's real estate holding company. I handle all asset protection, corporate structuring, and lease enforcement. You walked into this room making a series of incredibly bold, legally actionable threats based on fundamentally flawed premises. I am simply here to provide you with the correct documentation before you embarrass yourself further." Todd scoffed, but the absolute certainty in Terrence's voice made him hesitate. He tossed the business card onto the desk and crossed his arms. "Let us see this supposed documentation," Todd demanded, though a slight tremor of uncertainty had entered his loud voice. "Show me how you plan to explain away common law marriage and stolen equity." Terrence calmly unzipped his leather portfolio. He extracted a thick stack of perfectly arranged files and laid them flat on the desk. "First, let us address the ownership of the property in question." Terrence began sliding a certified deed forward. "The house is entirely owned by Zenith Holdings, a limited liability company in which Claire is the sole managing member. Derek's name has never appeared on any deed title or property record." Todd glanced at the paper, his jaw tightening. Terrence seamlessly slid a second document forward. "Next, let us review the exact nature of Derek's residency. This is the standard binding residential lease agreement Derek signed 18 months ago. You will notice it clearly outlines his monthly obligation of $3,500 as rent payable directly to Zenith Holdings." Terrence tapped a specific highlighted paragraph on the third page. "Please draw your attention to Clause 7, subsection B. It explicitly states that all payments yield absolute zero equity in the property. It is a strict tenant and landlord relationship. There is no sweat equity. There is no partnership." Patricia scoffed loudly, slamming her hand on the desk again. "That piece of paper means absolutely nothing," she shrieked. "They lived together as partners and he paid for the house." Terrence ignored her outburst entirely, focusing solely on the lawyer. "I saved the most important document for last," Todd Terrence said softly. He pulled out a single sheet of paper featuring a bold, notarized seal at the bottom. "When Derek signed the lease 18 months ago, he also signed this ironclad legal waiver. It unequivocally waives any and all claims to the property, explicitly protecting the LLC from the exact baseless common law marriage claims you are attempting to make today. Please note Derek's initials on every single paragraph, confirming he fully understood he was a temporary tenant with absolutely zero rights to the asset." Todd snatched the stack of papers from the desk. He shoved his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose, his eyes darting frantically across the text. As he read the lease agreement, the strict equity clause and the notarized waiver, the aggressive flushed color completely drained from his face. His obnoxious swagger vanished instantly, replaced by the terrified realization of a man stepping directly onto a landmine. Todd slowly lowered the documents. His hands were actually shaking. He turned his head slowly to look at Derek. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely delicious. "You told me you two were joint signers on a mortgage," Todd hissed, his voice dropping into a furious, panicked whisper. "You sat in my office and explicitly told me you jointly owned the property and had combined your assets. You signed a standard residential lease. You signed a legally binding equity waiver." Derek physically shrank back against the wall. The smug, arrogant facade he had worn into the office completely shattered. He looked like a cornered animal. "I thought it was just a formality." Derek stammered, his voice pitching high with panic. "She told me it was just paperwork for her business taxes. I am paying $3,500 a month. I am basically buying the house for her. We are a couple. It is our house." "It is a commercial lease, you idiot," Todd growled. "You lied to me. You have absolutely no legal standing here. You are a tenant who got evicted. If I file a lawsuit based on these fabricated claims, I will be disbarred. We have absolutely nothing." Patricia let out a loud, piercing gasp. She stepped aggressively toward the desk, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You planned this from the beginning," Patricia screamed, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "You manipulative, calculating little witch. You tricked him so you could steal his money. He funded your entire pathetic lifestyle for the last 18 months. He paid for absolutely everything. You are nothing without him." I did not say a single word. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee and looked directly at Terrence. Terrence smiled warmly. "I am so incredibly glad you brought up funding," Patricia, Terrence said smoothly. "Let us look at the wire transfers, shall we?" Terrence smoothly flipped the heavy leather divider to the second tab of his immaculate portfolio. He withdrew a thick, neatly bound stack of heavily highlighted credit card statements, certified bank logs, and chronologically organized transaction receipts. He let the bundle drop onto the center of the walnut desk with a heavy, satisfying thud that made Patricia physically jump. "You boldly claim your son funded Claire and her business," Terrence stated, his deep voice radiating absolute authority. "I find that narrative utterly fascinating, primarily because it completely contradicts the undeniable reality of these certified financial records. Let us trace the actual flow of money over the past 18 months. Terrence slid the top document toward Todd. The sleazy lawyer reluctantly picked it up, his previous bluster entirely replaced by a creeping, visible dread. "This is a comprehensive breakdown of Derek's actual tech salary." Terrence continued, pacing slightly behind my chair. "While he certainly makes a comfortable living, his gross income is entirely consumed by his own extravagant personal expenses. After taxes, his monthly take-home pay barely covers the lease on his imported sports car, his extensive collection of tailored Italian suits, his daily high-end dining, and his rather aggressive golf club membership dues. Derek literally lives paycheck to paycheck. He has zero savings and absolutely no investment portfolio to speak of." Derek stood frozen against the wall. He opened his mouth to argue, but his throat seemed to have completely dried up. Patricia turned to her son, her eyes wide with initial confusion that was rapidly morphing into horror. Terrence did not pause. He pulled a second set of documents from the stack, spreading them out across the desk, like a dealer revealing a losing poker hand. "Now let us examine how Derek actually managed to finance his sudden bursts of extreme generosity," Terrence said, his tone sharpening into a razor edge. He pointed to a highlighted row of numbers. 3 months ago, Derek took his subordinate Skylar on a lavish 5-star vacation to Miami. He chartered a private yacht and booked the penthouse suite at a luxury resort. Derek casually told you he paid for this with his annual corporate bonus, did he not, Patricia? Patricia swallowed hard, her arrogant posture finally collapsing. She nodded slowly, refusing to break eye contact with the documents. Terrence tapped the paper firmly. "Derek did not receive a corporate bonus this year. That Miami trip was entirely funded by a fraudulent cash advance pulled directly from Claire's primary business credit account. He memorized her PIN code, bypassed the dual authentication using her personal iPad while she was sleeping, and routed the funds into a hidden secondary account." Todd audibly gasped, dropping the papers back onto the desk as if they were literally on fire. Derek, what exactly did you do? Todd hissed, panic fully bleeding into his voice. I am not finished. Terrence announced his presence, dominating the entire room. He flipped to the next page, revealing a series of large, bolded transfers. Patricia, you recently enjoyed a massive top-to-bottom kitchen remodel in your suburban home. Custom marble countertops, imported brass fixtures, and commercial-grade appliances. Derek told you he cashed out his stock options to bless his mother with her dream kitchen. That was another blatant lie. Terrence slid the corresponding bank trace directly in front of Patricia. That remodel was paid for via 3 separate unauthorized wire transfers originating from Zenith Holdings. Your son stole directly from Claire's corporate operating budget to play the role of the wealthy, successful son. Patricia stared at the bank trace, the color draining so rapidly from her face that I genuinely thought she might faint. She looked at Derek, her hands trembling violently. You stole money to pay for my kitchen, she whispered, her voice cracking with profound humiliation. You told me you were a senior partner. You told me you were rich. Derek could not even look at his mother. He stared firmly at the polished concrete floor, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. And let us not forget the diamond tennis bracelet Derek recently purchased for Skylar. Terrence added casually, tossing a final receipt onto the pile. Another fraudulent cash advance. Another blatant theft. Terrence straightened his suit jacket and looked directly at Todd, who was actively backing away from the desk. You came into this office demanding $200,000 for unjust enrichment and constructive eviction. Terrence said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet volume. You claimed Derek held equity in this property. Terrence picked up a red pen and circled a bold final number at the very bottom of the primary ledger sheet. You do not have equity, Derek. You have debt. Between the stolen business funds, the unauthorized cash advances, the luxury vacations, the kitchen remodel, the jewelry, and the physical damage you caused to the property prior to your eviction, you owe Claire exactly $42,650. The silence in the boutique office was absolute. The rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning was the only sound. Todd looked physically ill. His eyes darted frantically between the undeniable paper trail and his utterly compromised client. He was no longer looking at a simple civil dispute over a broken lease. He was looking at a massive criminal liability. You committed credit card fraud, Todd whispered to Derek, his voice laced with absolute terror. You committed wire fraud. You stole from a registered corporate entity. Terrence offered one final devastating smile. He reached into his portfolio one last time and withdrew a single highly detailed sheet of paper. He slid it across the walnut desk, pushing it right against Todd's trembling hands. And here is the fully certified and verified IP log, Terrence stated smoothly. This document unequivocally proves that Derek executed every single one of these fraudulent financial transfers directly from his registered corporate laptop, using his company's extremely secure virtual private network to hide his tracks completely. Todd stared at the single sheet of paper resting on the polished walnut desk. The crisp black ink detailing the IP addresses, the timestamps, and the undeniable virtual private network routing protocols completely shattered his aggressive facade. The blustering lawyer suddenly looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of the gallows. He swallowed very hard, his throat bobbing nervously. The realization of his immediate proximity to a major felony charge washed over him. He was no longer representing a wrong tenant. He was attempting to extort $200,000 for a client who had committed corporate theft. Todd did not say another word. He reached out with shaking hands and snatched his battered leather briefcase off my desk. He threw it open, the brass clasps clattering loudly. He began blindly shoving his files and his pens into the leather satchel, not caring that the papers were crumpling in his haste. Todd, what are you doing? Derek asked, his voice cracking into a desperate pitch. You cannot just leave. You told me we had a bulletproof case. You promised me we were going to take her for everything she had. Todd slammed the briefcase shut. I am formally dropping you as a client, Derek. Todd spat, his voice trembling with raw fear and fury. You brought me into this room under false pretenses. You flatly lied to me about your financial contributions, you lied about your equity, and you deliberately hid your criminal activities. If I stay in this room for one more minute, I become an accessory to your felonies. Do not ever contact my office again. Do not call my cell phone. If you try to drag my name into this mess, I will personally testify against you." Without waiting for a response, Todd turned and practically sprinted out of the glass double doors. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, sealing Derek and Patricia inside my office. The oppressive silence returned heavier and more suffocating than before. Patricia watched the lawyer flee down the hallway. The terrifying reality finally managed to penetrate her thick armor of elite entitlement. Her golden child, the successful corporate executive she loved to brag about, was not a victim. He was a thief. He had stolen money to fund the very lifestyle she had been endlessly boasting about. Worse, he had left an undeniable digital trail, and the forensic accountant sitting next to me held every receipt. The immediate threat of severe jail time for her son caused her arrogant posture to crumble entirely. Patricia slowly turned back to face me. The venomous glare was instantly replaced by frantic desperation. Genuine tears welled up in her eyes, running down her cheeks. "Claire, please," Patricia begged, her voice shrinking into a pitiful, trembling sob. She reached across the desk, her manicured hands grasping desperately at the empty air. "You cannot do this. You cannot send my son to prison. He made a terrible mistake. He was just stressed about his job and trying to keep up appearances. We can figure this out between us. You loved him once, Claire. We are practically family. You know he has a good heart. You have to show us some family grace. Please, I am begging you. Do not destroy his life over money." I sat perfectly still in my ergonomic chair. I did not recoil from her grasping hands, nor did I offer a single shred of comfort. I simply looked at her weeping face. I leaned forward, resting my forearms comfortably on the cool walnut surface of my desk. I kept my voice incredibly soft, devoid of any warmth, anger, or pity. It was the voice of a woman who had completely excised these toxic people from her emotional reality. "Family grace," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Less than 10 minutes ago, you stood exactly where you are standing right now and called me a common scam artist. You slammed your hands on my desk and confidently declared that my business was a pathetic failed hobby. You enthusiastically brought a lawyer into my private office to threaten me with bankruptcy, extortion, and total ruin. You loudly proclaimed that I was an absolute nobody who leeched off your highly successful son." I paused, letting my cold, unblinking gaze shift from Patricia to the trembling man cowering against the wall. "You made it abundantly clear that you viewed my entire existence as a mere financial transaction to be exploited." I stated, my tone sharp and definitive. "I am simply treating you exactly like the business transaction you so desperately wanted me to be. There is no family here, Patricia. There is only a creditor and a debtor. You wanted to play corporate warfare. You lost." Terrence smoothly gathered his immaculate stack of certified financial logs, credit card statements, and wire transfer proofs. He aligned the edges of the heavy paper perfectly by tapping them against the desk. He placed the comprehensive forensic file back into his leather-bound portfolio. He closed the heavy cover and snapped the brass locking mechanism shut. The sharp metallic click echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You have exactly 15 days to wire the $42,650 into Zenith Holdings' primary operating account," Derek Terrence announced, his deep voice carrying the absolute weight of a final sentence. "The routing numbers are listed on the bottom of your eviction notice. If the funds do not completely clear by 5 o'clock post-meridium." On the 15th day, this entire forensic file goes directly to the New York Police Department Financial Crimes Unit, along with a formal complaint to your corporate employer regarding your unauthorized use of their secure network for grand larceny. Derek swayed unsteadily on his feet, his face turning a very sickly pale shade of green. He clutched his stomach, looking exactly as though he might violently vomit right onto the pristine, polished concrete floor of my beautiful office. Derek stumbled backward, his shoulder colliding heavily against the thick glass door of my office. He looked physically ill, his skin a mottled shade of pale gray, but beneath the terror in his eyes, a desperate cornered malice was already beginning to boil. He pushed himself off the glass turned and bolted down the hallway without looking back at his weeping mother. Patricia scrambled after him, her designer heels clicking frantically against the polished floor, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and shattered dignity. The heavy silence they left in their wake was nothing short of glorious. However, I knew Derek too well to believe he would simply surrender and wire the money. A narcissist stripped of his power does not reflect or repent. He immediately seeks to control the public narrative. He needed an audience to validate his manufactured victimhood. By the time his expensive leather loafers hit the pavement outside my building, his fear had completely transformed into a blinding toxic rage. Within 48 hours, Derek launched a full-scale digital smear campaign. He weaponized his professional and personal networks, desperate to destroy my credibility before my 15-day deadline expired. It started on LinkedIn. Derek published a massive multi-paragraph post under the guise of a cautionary business tale. He portrayed himself as a benevolent, highly successful tech executive who had been financially exploited by a predatory property management scam. He deliberately tagged Zenith Holdings, explicitly warning his extensive network of investors and developers to stay far away from my firm. He claimed I was running a fraudulent real estate syndicate, extorting innocent tenants with fabricated charges, and illegally seizing personal assets. He painted a masterful picture of an honest man blindsided by a calculating extortionist. He did not stop at professional sabotage. He immediately moved to Facebook and Instagram, flooding his personal feeds with lengthy, emotionally manipulative rants. He played the ultimate victim card, claiming he had spent the last 18 months generously funding the lifestyle of a woman who turned out to be a ruthless sociopath. Instead, he wove a tragic fiction about trusting the wrong person, warning his friends about the dangers of sociopathic gold diggers who use fake LLCs to steal the life savings of hardworking men. He garnered hundreds of sympathetic comments basking in the digital validation that fed his inflated ego, but his online temper tantrums were not enough to soothe his bruised pride. Derek needed to fortify his primary domain. On Monday morning, he strutted into his sleek glass and steel tech firm, wearing a tailored Italian suit he had paid for with my stolen money. He immediately set to work poisoning the water cooler. He gathered his colleagues in the break room, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper, spinning wild tales about his sudden relocation. He told everyone that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown. He claimed I was a mentally unstable, clinically insane gold digger who had illegally locked him out of his own home in a fit of hysterical jealousy. He painted himself as the exhausted patient partner who had finally been pushed to the breaking point by an unhinged woman. Right on cue, Skylar chimed in to fan the flames. She eagerly corroborated every single lie, leaning against the espresso machine and solemnly telling the staff how she had personally witnessed my aggressive, erratic behavior. They fed off each other, creating an echo chamber of absolute delusion, firmly believing they had successfully preempted any single strategic move I might ever make. Back in my office, the atmosphere was entirely undisturbed by Derek's frantic flailing. I was casually reviewing a new commercial zoning permit when Allison burst through the door. Her face was flushed with anger, her phone gripped tightly in her hand. She marched straight to my desk and shoved the glowing screen directly in front of my face. "You need to see this right now," Allison demanded, her voice vibrating with outrage. "He has completely lost his mind, Claire. He is posting about you on LinkedIn. He is publicly calling Zenith Holdings a fraudulent extortion ring. He is telling everyone you are a scam artist who stole his life savings. We need to issue a cease and desist immediately. We need to sue him for defamation before this impacts our upcoming investor meetings." I calmly reached out and took the phone from her trembling hand. I scrolled through Derek's lengthy, dramatically worded posts, reading every single lie, every exaggerated claim, every desperate attempt to save his crumbling reputation. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I did not feel threatened. I felt a deep, profound sense of satisfaction. I slowly handed the phone back to Allison and casually adjusted the cuffs of my tailored navy blazer. "I am not going to send a cease and desist. I stated, my voice completely smooth and unbothered. Let him post. Let him talk. He is simply digging his own grave much faster than I ever could. Terrence, is the file ready? Terrence looked up from his glowing screen, a sharp, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He tapped the screen once, locking the device. The corporate file is completely pristine, Claire Terrence confirmed smoothly. Every single fraudulent wire transfer, every unauthorized IP login from his company servers, and the explicit proof of corporate theft has been fully certified. Excellent, I replied, standing up from my desk. Grab the portfolio. It is time to go for a short walk. 40 minutes later, the three of us stepped through the towering automated glass doors of Derek's prestigious tech firm. The lobby was a massive, echoing cathedral of white marble and brushed steel. A severe-looking receptionist sat behind a sprawling security desk, demanding identification badges from a steady stream of employees. We did not pause. We did not sign the visitor log. We did not wait to be announced. Moving with unified, undeniable authority, Allison Terrence and I bypassed the security desk entirely. The receptionist called out, but we ignored her, stepping smoothly into the nearest glass elevator. I reached out my finger, pressing firmly against the illuminated button for the executive floor. The steel doors of the elevator slid shut, sealing the three of us inside. Allison stood to my right, rigid with anticipation, while Terrence stood to my left, holding his leather portfolio like a loaded weapon. We bypassed the standard operational floors, rising directly to the executive suite. When the doors parted, we stepped out onto the plush carpeting. I knew where Derek's corner office was located, but I did not even glance in that direction. We were not here to confront a former boyfriend. We were here to execute a surgical corporate strike. I led Allison and Terrence down the corridor, marching past the startled administrative assistants, and walked straight through the glass doors of the Human Resources Department. We bypassed the reception desk and stepped directly into the office of Brenda Carmichael, the Director of Human Resources. She was seated alongside Marcus Vance, the Chief Financial Officer. They looked up in surprise as we entered unannounced. Brenda stood up, her expression hardening into a mask of outrage. She opened her mouth to demand security, but Terrence moved faster. He placed his heavy portfolio directly onto the center of their table. He did not introduce himself with pleasantries. He simply looked between Brenda and Marcus, with the absolute authority of a man holding their company's fate in his hands. "We are not here to discuss personal matters," Terrence stated, his rich baritone commanding the room. "I am a forensic accountant representing Zenith Holdings. I am here to present irrefutable evidence of severe corporate fraud, systemic misappropriation of company funds, and a massive human resources liability occurring at the senior executive level of your firm." Marcus slowly lowered his pen. He gestured for Brenda to sit back down, his eyes locked onto Terrence's portfolio. Terrence unzipped the case and extracted a stack of corporate expense reports. During the legal discovery phase of a recent civil dispute, we obtained these certified financial records, Terrence explained, sliding the documents across the table. They stopped directly in front of Marcus. "You will find that one of your senior directors has been treating your corporate expense accounts as his own personal slush fund." Marcus adjusted his glasses and opened the file. Brenda leaned over his shoulder, her initial annoyance dissolving into sharp, focused scrutiny. The blood began to drain from Marcus's face immediately. He flipped to the second page, his jaw tightening into a hard line. Terrence did not wait for them to finish reading before he delivered the killing blow. He tapped a specific highlighted row on the third page. "Please draw your attention to the transaction dated 3 months ago," Terrence instructed. "Your senior director, Derek, expensed a $6,000 trip to Miami. He formally categorized this expenditure as a client acquisition event. He claimed the flights and luxury resort were necessary expenses to woo a prospective international client." Marcus looked up, his expression grim. "I remember signing off on this," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. He submitted a comprehensive itinerary. Terrence smiled, a cold, predatory expression. The itinerary was completely fabricated. There was no international client. Derek utilized those funds to take a vacation. But the theft of $6,000 is the least of your concerns right now. Terrence slid a secondary document over the top of the expense report. It was a copy of the passenger manifest and the hotel registry. Please note the name of the second guest listed on that trip. Terrence continued, his voice echoing in the silent room. Derek deliberately logged his travel companion in your corporate expense system as contractor personnel to hide her identity. However, the flight manifest clearly shows he brought Skylar, a junior employee who works directly under his supervision in the marketing department. He used corporate funds to finance a romantic getaway with a direct subordinate, explicitly falsified company financial records to conceal the fraternization, and then actively involve that same subordinate in a coordinated campaign of corporate theft. Brenda leaned back in her chair, perfectly still. The implications of what Terrence was saying were absolutely catastrophic for her department. She was looking at a senior executive who had committed wire fraud, compromised a junior staff member, and exposed the entire company to a massive liability lawsuit. Marcus pulled off his glasses and rubbed his temples, letting out a ragged exhale. The sheer audacity of the theft was staggering, but the stupidity of leaving an auditable paper trail truly baffled him. He looked at Brenda. We have explicit zero-tolerance policies regarding both expense fraud and undisclosed subordinate relationships, Marcus stated flatly. The liability here is completely unmanageable. Brenda did not say a word. Her face had turned stony, drained of any professional courtesy. She was staring at the passenger manifest as if it were a snake coiled on her table. She understood instantly that Derek was not just a liability. He was a walking corporate landmine that had just detonated inside her building. He had abused his power, stolen their money, and jeopardized the integrity of her entire workforce. I remained completely silent, watching the beautiful, destructive reality wash over them. I had promised Derek that I would treat him exactly like a business transaction. I was simply returning the chaos he had brought to my doorstep. I did not need to scream or cry or throw a desperate fit in the lobby. I simply handed his employers the shovel he had already used to dig his own grave and let them take care of the rest. Brenda slowly reached across her wide desk. She did not look up at me, nor did she look at Marcus. Her eyes remained locked onto the undeniable proof of Derek's absolute arrogance and complete professional destruction. She firmly pressed a single glowing red button on her desk phone. The intercom crackled to life instantly. Security, Brenda said, her voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold and sharp as cracked ice. I need a detail on the 4th floor immediately. We turned and exited the human resources suite with the quiet, synchronized precision of a strike team that had just successfully detonated its payload. Terrence adjusted his grip on his heavy leather portfolio, his face an impassive mask of professional satisfaction. Allison walked beside me, her posture incredibly straight, a sharp, triumphant gleam dancing in her eyes. I did not feel the need to run or hide. I did not want to scurry out the back exit like a nervous intruder. We bypassed the executive elevators entirely and walked purposefully toward the sweeping glass atrium that dominated the center of the 4th floor. The architectural design of the building featured a massive open-concept layout. The executive suite sat on a suspended mezzanine enclosed entirely in thick, soundproof glass. This elevated vantage point offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the sprawling sales floor directly below us. I rested my hands lightly on the cool metal railing of the balcony, looking down into the buzzing hive of corporate activity. Hundreds of employees sat at sleek white desks wearing headsets, clicking away at keyboards, entirely unaware of the absolute magnitude of the reckoning that was currently descending upon their department. It did not take long. The human resources director was clearly a woman who prioritized swift, brutal efficiency when mitigating a corporate liability. A set of frosted glass doors on the far side of the lower level swung open with sudden aggressive force. 4 broad-shouldered security guards marched onto the sales floor. They moved with a rigid, synchronized, and undeniably intimidating purpose. They did not stop to chat. They did not pause to ask for directions. They cut a direct, unyielding path through the labyrinth of cubicles. The ambient noise of the room began to drop section by section as employees noticed the imposing security detail marching through their midst. Whispers rippled across the floor, heads turning, keyboards falling silent. I tracked the guards from my elevated position. They were heading straight for the premium corner suite assigned to the top regional directors. I spotted Derek immediately. He was leaning casually against the edge of a subordinate employee's desk, holding a ceramic coffee mug, laughing loudly at some joke. He looked incredibly comfortable, perfectly in his element, wearing the arrogant swagger of a man who firmly believed he owned the entire building. The lead security guard stepped directly behind Derek and tapped him firmly on the shoulder. Derek spun around, an annoyed expression quickly forming on his face. The guard said something short and sharp. Derek's arrogant smile vanished instantly. He placed his coffee mug down on the desk with a trembling hand. The second guard stepped forward and thrust a flattened, unassembled cardboard box directly into Derek's chest. It was the universal corporate symbol for absolute, immediate termination. Derek visibly recoiled, shaking his head frantically. He began gesturing wildly, pointing toward the ceiling, undoubtedly demanding to speak with his superiors, demanding to call human resources, demanding to know who authorized this. The lead guard simply crossed his massive arms and shook his head, refusing to engage in any debate. The guard pointed a thick finger at the cardboard box, then pointed directly at Derek's desk. The instruction was clear. Pack your belongings. Now. While Derek desperately attempted to argue his way out of an ironclad termination, the remaining two security guards bypassed his desk entirely. They marched 2 aisles over and stopped directly in front of a smaller, brightly decorated cubicle. Skylar looked up from her dual monitors, her eyes widening in absolute shock. The third guard handed her an identical cardboard box. Skylar covered her mouth with her hands, letting out a sharp, audible gasp that echoed across the now completely silent sales floor. She looked over at Derek, seeking salvation, seeking the powerful executive who had promised her the world on a stolen credit card. But Derek was completely powerless. The entire floor had ground to a halt. Every single employee was standing up, peering over the partitions, watching in stunned fascination as their supposedly brilliant top director and his young mistress were publicly dismantled. Derek began throwing his personal items into the box, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his heavy glass nameplate. It shattered against the floor. No one moved to help him. The guards flanked him tightly, leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. Skylar was sobbing openly, haphazardly, shoving her belongings into her box, her mascara running down her flushed cheeks. The guards instructed them to surrender their corporate badges. Derek unclipped his lanyard with agonizing slowness, dropping it into the guard's outstretched palm. He was completely stripped of his rank, his access, and his dignity. The guards commanded them to walk. The perp walk began. Derek and Skylar were marched down the main central aisle of the sales floor. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Skylar's quiet weeping and the heavy footsteps of the security detail. Hundreds of eyes tracked their humiliating exit. The people Derek had lied to, the colleagues he had manipulated, the staff he had boasted to just that morning, all watched him being escorted out like a common criminal. He kept his head down, staring fixedly at the floor, his face burning with a bright, feverish red flush of ultimate disgrace. As the security escort forced him toward the main exit doors, located directly beneath the executive mezzanine, Derek instinctively looked up. Perhaps he was looking for a sympathetic face, or perhaps he was searching for the human resources director who had authorized his public execution. Instead, his eyes scanned upward and locked directly onto the glass balcony. He froze. His expensive leather shoes stopped moving. He stared straight up at me. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the man who had tried to steal my life. I did not gloat. I did not sneer. I simply raised my right hand, tilted my head, and gave him a very cheerful, remarkably elegant wave goodbye. 1 month later, the morning sun poured through the massive bay windows of my newly renovated living room, casting long, golden geometric patterns across the pristine hardwood floors. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and expensive citrus diffusers. I stood near the center island of my kitchen, a steaming mug of black coffee in my hand, quietly observing the interior design team meticulously installing the final fixtures. They were hanging a spectacular custom-crafted chandelier above the dining table, a cascading arrangement of brushed brass and frosted glass that perfectly captured the elegant, modern aesthetic I had envisioned from the very beginning. The chaotic drama of the past year had been entirely scrubbed clean from my daily life, replaced by a profound, unshakable tranquility that felt deeply satisfying. I had taken the shattered remnants of my personal life and forged them into an absolute triumph. Zenith Holdings was thriving, my professional reputation was immaculate, and the toxic weight of my previous relationship was nothing but a distant, rapidly fading memory. I took a slow, appreciative sip of my rich, dark roast coffee, savoring the quiet hum of steady progress surrounding me. My peaceful morning was abruptly interrupted by the sharp, persistent vibration of my personal cell phone resting on the cool marble countertop. I set my mug down and glanced at the glowing screen. It was an unsaved number, but the area code belonged to a wealthy suburb located just outside the city limits. I swiped the screen to answer, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a single word to the caller. "Claire, please do not hang up on me," a familiar voice pleaded instantly. It was Patricia. Her tone was completely unrecognizable to me. The haughty, aristocratic sneer that had always coded her words was entirely gone, replaced by a ragged, desperate, and incredibly wet-sounding sob. She was hyperventilating, struggling to force the words through her uncontrollable tears. I leaned against the marble counter, crossing my ankles, completely unfazed by her sudden emotional collapse. I remained utterly silent, allowing her to flounder in the awkward, heavy space between us. "Derek lost everything," Claire Patricia cried out, her voice breaking pathetically into a harsh, ugly whine. "They fired him. They fired him for cause. They marched him out of the building like a common criminal and stripped him of all his accumulated stock options. He did not get a single cent of severance pay from them. He cannot even file for unemployment because of the internal corporate fraud allegations. He is completely ruined. He has absolutely nothing left to his name." I listened to the frantic stream of panicked information, feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction settling firmly into my bones. "And Skylar?" I asked, my voice completely smooth and utterly devoid of pity. Patricia let out a bitter, choked laugh. She left him the exact same day Patricia spat vicious venom, temporarily overriding her tears. The very second she realized the corporate credit cards were deactivated and the luxury vacations were over, she packed her bags and blocked his number. She explicitly told him he was a massive liability. Now he is living down in my basement. My brilliant, successful son is sleeping on a damp pull-out couch and working at a mall kiosk selling refurbished cell phones just to pay for his basic groceries. He is a broken shell of a man, Claire. He cannot even look me in the eye anymore. "That sounds like a perfectly natural consequence of his own choices, Patricia," I replied coldly, inspecting my manicured fingernails. "Actions have a price. He is currently paying his." Patricia let out a loud, pathetic wail, the horrific sound echoing through the receiver. "But you are destroying me too?" "Claire," she begged, her pride entirely abandoned. "I am calling to beg you. Please, you simply have to drop the demand for the $42,650 immediately. You have your company, you have your success. You do not need that money, but enforcing this debt is completely destroying my life. I deeply need you to show some mercy." I stood up straight, my eyes narrowing slightly. "Explain yourself," I commanded. Patricia took a shuddering breath, her voice dropping into a humiliated whisper. "Derek was paying my mortgage," she confessed, the shameful truth finally spilling out. "He has been covering my primary living expenses for the past 2 years. When he lost his executive position, the money completely dried up. I do not have the financial savings to cover the arrears. The bank sent the final notice yesterday, Claire. They are initiating foreclosure proceedings on my home. If you enforce that corporate theft debt against Derek, he will never be able to dig himself out, and I will be out on the street. I will lose my house. I will lose everything I have ever built. You are severely punishing me for his mistakes. Please, I am begging you as a mother. I listened to the desperate weeping woman on the other end of the line, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, calculating resolve. She was the very same woman who had sat in my living room and smugly defended her son's infidelity. She was the same woman who had actively encouraged him to steal my assets and discard me without a second thought. She had happily funded her luxurious suburban lifestyle using the dirty money her son had stolen from my firm. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for her impending foreclosure or her tears. You told me I needed to know my place. I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority and icy precision over the speaker. I found it. It is at the top. I expect the full wire transfer by Friday, Patricia. Tell Derek he does not get a say in the matter anymore. I very slowly pulled the mobile phone away from my right ear, deliberately pressed the glowing red icon to end the call, and permanently blocked the number. The transformation of the property was miraculous, a physical manifestation of the mental clarity I had achieved. Where Derek's oppressive man cave had once festered like a dark stain, a stunning sunlit solarium now stood in its place. I had personally overseen the demolition of those soundproofed walls, replacing them with floor-to-ceiling glass panes that invited the outside world in. Lush green plants thrived in the natural sunlight, casting shifting shadows across the newly installed hardwood floors. The space that had once symbolized his secretive control was now flooded with warmth, transparency, and life. It was the perfect centerpiece for a housewarming party, and the lively atmosphere buzzing around me was a testament to victory. Soft jazz mingled with the easy laughter of people who genuinely respected one another. Caterers moved seamlessly through the open-concept kitchen, offering trays of seared scallops and flutes filled with vintage champagne. There was no tension in the air. There was no need to walk on eggshells. I did not have to shrink myself to fit into the fragile parameters of a narcissist's ego. I was standing entirely in my own power in a gorgeous sanctuary I had paid for with my unyielding ambition. I navigated slowly through the lively crowd, exchanging warm smiles and confident handshakes with my colleagues and trusted friends. I eventually found my way to the center of the solarium, where Allison and Terrence were standing near a towering monstera plant, deep in animated conversation. Allison wore a brilliant emerald silk dress, her face glowing with a relaxed, authentic happiness that had been absent during the grueling weeks of our corporate warfare. Terrence looked impeccably sharp in a tailored charcoal suit, holding his champagne flute with the casual elegance of a man who had flawlessly executed a professional masterpiece. They noticed my approach and immediately turned their undivided attention toward me. Terrence raised his glass, a sharp, knowing smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. To Claire, Terrence announced, his rich, commanding voice easily carrying over the ambient hum of the party. A woman who understands that the strongest, most enduring foundation a person can ever build is not made of concrete or steel. It is made of airtight contracts and brutal audits. Allison laughed brightly, lifting her own crystal glass to join the gesture. To absolute undeniable freedom, she added, her eyes shining with genuine affection and fierce loyalty. We clinked our glasses together, the delicate ring of crystal echoing perfectly in the open space. This was my carefully chosen family. They were the brilliant, ruthlessly competent, and fiercely loyal people who had stood by my side and helped me meticulously dismantle a toxic empire just to build an entirely new one. After enjoying a long, deeply satisfying sip of the cold champagne, I gently excused myself from the joyful conversation. I needed a brief, solitary moment of profound quiet to fully process the sheer magnitude of the evening. I stepped carefully through the heavy sliding glass doors and walked out onto the expansive, newly paved back patio. The crisp, cool evening air immediately brushed against my skin, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine from the extensively manicured garden. The dark night sky above was completely clear, a vast, breathtaking canopy of brilliant stars stretching out endlessly over the sprawling property. I leaned my elbows heavily against the smooth stone railing, looking out over the perfectly trimmed emerald lawn. In the serene quiet of the backyard, my mind briefly drifted back to the very beginning of this intense, completely exhausting journey. I thought deeply about the specific night Derek had frantically packed his designer bags, standing aggressively in my front hallway with his chest puffed out in manufactured delusional superiority. I vividly remembered the exact arrogant cadence of his voice as he delivered what he foolishly believed would be his final devastating blow. "You do not get a say in where I go or who I am with." He had spat those exact words at me, fully expecting me to instantly crumble into a pathetic puddle of weeping desperation. He had desperately wanted to break me. He wanted to leave me feeling entirely powerless. A slow, deep smile spread widely across my face as I breathed in the crisp evening air. He was absolutely right. I did not need a say in his pathetic, rapidly crumbling life. I never did. The only thing I ever needed a say in was my own life, my own highly successful career, and my own impenetrable boundaries. When he foolishly violated those boundaries, I did not waste my breath begging him to stay or demanding to desperately control his clandestine affairs. I simply used my clear voice, my sharp intellect, and my vast resources to completely obliterate his leverage and firmly secure my own corporate empire. Derek had incorrectly assumed that my initial silence in the face of his betrayal was a glaring sign of weakness. He fundamentally misunderstood the critical difference between a victim frozen in fear and a predator patiently calculating its lethal strike. He had arrogantly walked away thinking he held all the winning cards, completely unaware that I owned the entire casino. I took one last sweeping look at the quiet, beautiful garden, finally letting go of the last microscopic thread of the ugly past. There was no anger left. There was no bitter resentment. There was only a vast, incredibly peaceful space where he used to be, now fully occupied by my own formidable, limitless potential. I turned away from the stone railing and looked back through the glowing glass doors. The warm, inviting light from the solarium spilled out onto the dark patio. I could clearly see Allison laughing loudly at a joke Terrence had just made, their shared joy bright and unmistakable. I straightened my posture, smoothed the expensive fabric of my dress, and confidently walked back inside to join my real family. I was wealthy, I was fiercely independent, and I was completely, unequivocally untouchable.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.